The air in the Finger Lakes region does not just blow. It mourns. It carries the scent of damp earth and the ghost of a dream that nearly suffocated under the weight of a collapsing barn and a fragmenting soul. Pete Larson stood amidst the skeletal remains of a life he thought he had escaped, clutching a handful of dirt that felt more like ashes than soil. Once, he was a man of the polished world, an architect of steel and glass, yet he found himself kneeling in the mud of a failing ancestral legacy, haunted by the silent judgment of the generations who had bled into this land before him. The silence of the 45 acres was not peaceful. It was a deafening indictment of his own exhaustion. How does a man who spent his life building structures for others find the strength to rebuild a shattered spirit when the very foundation of his identity is eroding into the creek? This is not a story of a hobby. It is a descent into the marrow of sacrifice, where the cost of the simple life is often paid in the currency of sanity and sweat. The city does not sleep. It vibrates with a predatory, mechanical hum that gnaws at the edges of the human spirit. Inside the steel and glass monolith of a premier architectural firm, the air is filtered, climate-controlled, and utterly devoid of life. Pete Larson sits entombed within this transparency. High above the street, the overhead LEDs cast a sterile, shadowless glare across his drafting table, illuminating blueprints that are masterpieces of mathematical precision and emotional emptiness. To the outside world, this is the pinnacle, a man who has mastered the geometry of modern success. But inside the ribcage of the architect, a structural failure is occurring. His heart beats with the heavy, rhythmic thud of a trapped bird, echoing against the glass walls that offer a view of the skyline but no vision of a future. Every line he draws feels like another bar being added to a cage of his own design. He stares at the digital clock on his monitor. 4:54 p.m. The numbers are cold, glowing with a mocking persistence. In this gray space, time is not measured by seasons or the position of the sun, but by the slow, agonizing erosion of the self. Pete's mind, seeking refuge, drifts away from the sterile city drawings and toward a visceral, jagged memory. The smell of damp earth after a Finger Lakes rain. He can almost feel the grit of upstate soil beneath his fingernails, a sharp contrast to the smoothness of his expensive fountain pen. He remembers his grandfather's hands, mapped with deep, grease-stained fissures that told stories of survival and tactile reality. Those hands did not just design. They sustained. They smelled of diesel, wood smoke, and honest toil, a scent that Pete now realizes was the aroma of freedom. The psychological weight of the ancestral ghost begins to press into the sterile room. Pete feels the silent, multi-generational judgment of the Larsons, men who bled into the 45 acres of just a few acres farm so that he could sit in this air-conditioned tower. He realizes, with a sickening clarity, that he has traded his inheritance of sweat for a paycheck of shadows. The turning point is not a shout, but a terrifyingly quiet internal snap. He looks at the blueprints of a multi-million-dollar complex and sees only a tombstone for his own identity. He is designing monuments for a life he no longer wants to live, creating spaces for people he will never know, while his own internal house is in a state of total collapse. Hillary enters his thoughts then, not as a partner in this escape but as a casualty of it. He imagines her face in the soft light of their suburban home, unaware that the foundation of their comfortable, predictable life is being dismantled by a man who can no longer breathe. The atmosphere in the office grows heavy, the oxygen seemingly replaced by the dust of a collapsing dream. He isn't just planning a career change. He is running toward a ghost, chasing a phantom of rural stability that might just be a mirage. The fear is a cold stone in his gut, the fear that he is not moving to something, but merely fleeing the vacuum of his own existence. As the final employees depart, the motion sensor lights click off one by one, plunging the office into a predatory twilight. Pete stands, his limbs leaden with the gravity of what he is about to do. He packs a small bag, leaving behind the trophies of a career that now feels like a stolen life. He pauses at the heavy glass door, catching his own reflection in the darkened pane. The man staring back is a stranger, hollowed out, desperate, and standing on the precipice of a void. He has destroyed his safety, Yet he has no map for the wilderness that awaits. The cliffhanger. As the last box is loaded, Pete catches his reflection in the dark window of his office. A man who has burned his bridges, only to realize he doesn't yet know how to swim in the waters he's chosen. The transition is not a cinematic montage of golden wheat and triumphant sunrises. It is a brutal, unlubricated collision with a reality that smells of ancient manure and damp, pervasive mold. The sleek, aromatic scent of expensive city coffee has been replaced by the pungent, metallic tang of rusted iron and the sour breath of a barn that has been exhaling decay for decades. As the initial adrenaline of the move dissolves, Pete Larson finds himself standing in the center of a landscape that does not recognize him. The 45 acres are not a sanctuary. They are a mounting list of demands. The setting is dominated by the decaying infrastructure of just a few acres farm, where the very buildings seem to be kneeling under the weight of time, their silhouetted frames appearing like skeletal remains against the bruised gray of the New York sky. Psychologically, Pete is drowning in the imposter's burden. Every morning, he wakes to a body that feels as though it has been systematically dismantled and incorrectly reassembled. His muscles, once accustomed to the light resistance of a keyboard, now throb with the agonizing violence of unaccustomed labor. His hands, previously soft and articulate, are now a roadmap of raw blisters, purple bruises, and dirt that has been driven so deep into the pores it feels permanent. But the physical pain is merely a distraction from the deeper, festering wound, the barn. To an architect, a building is a statement of intent, but this barn is a statement of failure. He looks at the sagging ridgeline and the daylight peeking through the siding, and he sees a metaphor for his own crumbling confidence. He is a man of theory, trying to negotiate with a world of practice that possesses no mercy for the uninitiated. Every broken fence post he encounters feels like a personal indictment, a silent mockery of his transition from a master of blueprints to a novice of the mud. Isolation becomes his primary companion. In the city, the noise was a shield, but here the silence is a mirror. He spends hours in the pastures, the only sound being the rhythmic tearing of grass by the cattle and the mocking whistle of the wind through the eaves. He feels the crushing weight of being the man in charge, while secretly believing he is a fraud. He watches Hillary from a distance, her silhouette moving through the farmhouse, and the guilt becomes a physical weight in his chest. He has uprooted her for a dream he is currently failing to maintain. The simple life is proving to be a complex nightmare of logistics, biology, and gravity. The turning point arrives not with a breakthrough, but with a breakdown. A brutal winter storm descends upon the Finger Lakes, a nor'easter that turns the air into a blinding curtain of ice and fury. The temperature plummets until the very air feels like a blade against the skin. The livestock's survival, their very lives, now rests entirely in the hands of a man who isn't sure he has the strength to save himself. Pete is forced out into the whiteout, his headlamp cutting a pathetic, jittery path through the chaos. He struggles to haul frozen water buckets, his breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps that freeze to his collar. He looks down at the frozen ground, a solid block of indifference, and the realization hits him with the force of a physical blow. The land does not care about his credentials. It does not care about his degrees, his former salary, or his refined aesthetic. The earth is not his partner. It is his examiner, and he is failing the test. He retreats into the dark maw of the barn, seeking shelter from the wind that screams like a wounded animal. He stands amongst the cattle, their warmth the only thing keeping the darkness from feeling absolute. He leans his head against a massive oak timber, the wood cold and unyielding against his forehead. In this moment of total psychological exhaustion, he is stripped of his ego, left only with the terrifying fragility of his choices. He is a man standing on the edge of a collapse that is both structural and spiritual. The cliffhanger. A sudden, sickening crack echoes from the main barn's support beam during a midnight gale, leaving Pete standing in the dark, wondering if the roof, and his dream, will collapse before the sun rises. Fame does not arrive at just a few acres with the flash of paparazzi bulbs or the velvet touch of a red carpet. It arrives through the cold, glass eye of a wide-angle lens. The setting has shifted into an intimate, often claustrophobic space. The few feet of air that exist between Pete Larson and the camera he holds with trembling hands. In this modern agrarian theater, the dirt on his brow is no longer just dirt. It is production value. As he begins to document the agonizing slow-motion collapse and the occasional hard-won victory of the farm, the world begins to watch. Millions of eyes, peering through glowing screens in cubicles and subway cars, begin to project their own desires for escape onto his weary frame. Pete has become a symbol of the great return to the earth, but the psychological pressure of being an icon for the disillusioned is a weight heavier than any hay bale. Behind the scenes, the reality is a sharpening blade. While the digital comments section overflows with praise for his courage, the farm's finances are a tightening noose. The psychological conflict is a war of attrition between the success he must project and the failure he smells on his own skin. He finds himself performing the role of the resilient pioneer, a character who greets every setback with a stoic nod, while privately he is unraveling. There are moments, hidden from the camera's view, where he stands in the lee of the machinery shed and weeps over a lost calf, a tiny, cold life that slipped through his fingers while he was busy checking his upload progress. He mourns a failed harvest not just as a loss of income, but as a betrayal of the audience that expects him to thrive. The internal struggle is one of terrifying authenticity. How much of the marrow can he truly show? If he reveals the depth of his despair, does he shatter the dream he is selling to others? The turning point occurs during a quiet, gray dawn when the camera battery dies, leaving him in a silence so profound it feels like a physical blow. In that stillness, he realizes that his vulnerability, his willingness to bleed in public, is his only true crop. He is no longer just farming the rocky New York soil. He is farming the human experience, tilling the universal fields of fear, hope, and exhaustion. Yet, this realization only serves to deepen his isolation. He is a man watched by millions, a man whose every sigh is analyzed by a global audience. And yet, as he stands in the knee-deep mud of the pig paddock, he has never felt more utterly alone. He is a ghost in his own life, a digital projection of a man who is actually just trying to keep his head above water. The atmosphere of the farm becomes surreal, a blend of ancient labor and high-tech scrutiny. He looks at his reflection in the camera's flip-out screen and sees the cracks in his own facade. The hollowed-out eyes, the forced smile, the way his hands shake when the record light isn't blinking. He is maintaining a legend for a world that needs him to be strong, while his own internal foundation is turning to silt. He has become a prisoner of the lens, trapped by the very medium he used to seek connection. The fame hasn't brought him closer to the world. It has built a transparent wall between him and the life he is actually living. The cliffhanger. After a particularly raw video upload, Pete receives a message that threatens to shatter the thin veneer of his public persona, forcing him to face a truth he has hidden even from Hillary. The dawn over the Finger Lakes no longer arrives as an antagonist. The light that crests the eastern ridges is soft, filtered through a haze of morning dew that clings to pastures now vibrant, humming, and undeniably alive. The setting has undergone a profound transformation. The skeletal remains of the farm have been fleshed out with purpose. The fences are straight, the cattle move with a rhythmic contentment across lush orchard grass, and the barn, once a monument to rot, stands tall, its new timbers silvering under the sun like the hair of a wise elder. But the atmosphere is not one of cheap triumph. The air carries a weight, a quiet, hard-won wisdom that only settles on a man who has looked into the abyss and decided to plant a garden there. Pete Larson moves through the morning chore routine with a grace that was absent in the years of his frantic struggle. The permanent scars remain, not just in the gnarled grain of the reclaimed wood or the healed gashes on his hands, but in the way his eyes hold the horizon. The tragedy of the past, the nights of near bankruptcy where the ledger felt like a death warrant, and the terrifying mental collapses where the gray space of the city threatened to swallow him whole again. All of it has been processed. He has taken the debris of his former life and tilled it back into the earth. The losses are no longer weights dragging him down. They have become the fertilizer, the dark and necessary nutrients that allow a soul to finally take root. His rebirth did not come from a sudden stroke of luck or a viral video, but through the agonizing acceptance of imperfection. The architect within him has finally died, or perhaps he has simply evolved. He has stopped trying to impose a rigid mathematical design upon the chaos of nature. He no longer tries to conquer the 45 acres. He has learned, through the school of failure, to listen to them. The psychological arc of his journey reaches its zenith as he moves from the ego of ownership to the humility of stewardship. He realizes that he does not own this soil any more than he owns the wind. He is merely its temporary guardian, a man charged with tending a sanctuary that was never meant to be a high-yield business, but a refuge for a broken modern spirit. In the quiet of the afternoon, Pete stands in the same spot where he once knelt in the frozen mud, contemplating the end of his dream. The sensory details of the present are overwhelming. The warmth of the sun on his neck, the sweet, fermented smell of high-quality silage, and the distant, melodic clatter of Hillary working in the garden. He reflects on the legacy of just a few acres, understanding now that the farm was a mirror. It reflected back to him every fear he tried to hide in a glass office, and it forced him to face them without the armor of a title or a salary. He is covered in the dirt of a life well suffered. It is a holy kind of filth, the grime of a man who has finally found a version of himself that doesn't require a blueprint to exist. He watches the camera lens from a distance, no longer a slave to its gaze. The record light is just a tool now, not a lifeline. He has found a way to bridge the gap between his private peace and his public story, realizing that his greatest contribution wasn't teaching people how to farm, but showing them how to survive the death of their own expectations. His hands, once trembling with the palsy of exhaustion and doubt, are steady as he leans against the gate. There is a profound, poetic stillness in his posture. A man who has finally stopped running toward ghosts and started walking alongside the living. The shadows of the afternoon begin to lengthen, stretching across the fields like long, cool fingers. Pete looks toward the farmhouse, where the windows catch the amber glow of the setting sun, turning the humble structure into a lantern of gold. He thinks of the blueprints he once obsessed over, the sterile, perfect lines of a life he never wanted, and compares them to the messy, beautiful reality of the muck-stained boots and the calloused palms. He realizes that beauty doesn't require perfection. It only requires presence. He is finally, truly present. The cliffhanger. He looks toward the horizon where his children are playing, their laughter drifting over the clover like a song, and for the first time he doesn't see a burden of legacy. He sees a bridge to a future that doesn't need blueprints to be beautiful.